We all spend most our lives as normal people. Every day, we engage in tasks and make decisions. We believe that some things are true and others false, some right and others wrong. We have pleasant emotions and unpleasant ones. But in this class, it is important that, at appropriate times, you learn to set aside being a normal person and put on your preen theory hat. This does not mean you have abandoned your life as a normal person. You could not even if you tried. Learning to keep your preen theory hat on is not easy, especially when the preen theoretic view is at odds with your view as a normal person.
So preen theory is not in competition with your normal person view of the world. It's not in competition. It is just a different view. And it's important that in this class that you develop the ability to sort of break yourself in two, keeping your normal person sort of set aside as best you can, and be able to say, well, what does this look like from the preen theoretic point of view as well? And okay. And as I say, it's not easy. It's especially when the preen theoretic view turns out to be at odds with your normal person view. So, for example, perhaps you have opinions on politics, right? But if we ask you to set aside and look at what's happening in the world in politics, for example, and put on your preen theory hat, you're likely to get a perception of what's going on, which says you're not right or wrong about what's going on. There's this other view that says, here's what's going on. A process is going on, and you're involved in that process, and you have thoughts about it. All right. So that means, I guess from now on, I might want you guys, to answer a question or say a comment and then ask you to look at it from the preen theoretic point of view. Okay. So much for that. We're going to return to how the brain captures memes and finish that off. Okay.
Importantly, while the genes have given us systems for recording memes, it appears they have not given the conscious part of our brains direct control of their removal. We cannot simply decide to forget our memories, just make them go away. This may have important implications for psychology. Lenote, can we make our meme go away by our volition? Can you unsee memories you find distasteful?
So we had touched on this, but it's my impression that we can't make our memories just go away by volition. We can certainly make them go away indirectly. For example, if you bang your head hard enough against a wall, you'll probably succeed in getting some of your memories erased. All right, but we can't just say, oh, I wish I hadn't seen that and have it go away. It doesn't go away. Do you guys agree with that? I'm really asking a question here. Okay, good. Okay, so now we came to another discussion which we touched on. We were using a meditator in the example, but I've switched it a little bit. So this has to do with comparing 12-step programs, like I think Alcoholics Anonymous is such a thing. Yes, I mean, I think that's right. And cognitive behavioral talk therapy. which I think is one of the more common forms of talk therapy that is out there right now. Okay. And the question is, are they different? Well, are they different? Well, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? Well, of course they're different. Yes. And this brings us to Adelman's lemma. Okay. Adelman's lemma is any two things that are not identical are different in some way. Seems trivial, but it is what keeps a lot of arguments you have with other people going, and is the reason why you can never quite get somebody to admit that you're right and they were wrong. Well, occasionally you can, but okay. And that's this. If I say, well, um, let's say LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of all time. And you say, no, it's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right? And you say, well, who won the most rings? And in this case, I'm not sure what the answer is, right? But once you say that, you might get the other person to uh, take the point of view. Well, yes, but your person was in the league longer and there were more games being played then. So of course he could have gotten more points and blah, blah, blah. All right. It's an example of when two things aren't identical, you can always point to differences between them. And you can look for those differences uh, to escape any argument, pretty much. So I guess that's an aside. But um, from a Green theoretic point of view, how different are cognitive behavioral therapy and 12-step programs? That is there a reason from a pre-theoretic point of view to think one is more likely to help an alcoholic quit? Well, quit ain't quite right. No, it was right. Quit than the other. So what do you think? How should we look at this as green theorists, these two therapies? Okay. Were you about to talk, Nathan, or
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm talking to myself. My
oh,
thought
no.
was
Yeah.
I actually did have one thought. In terms of preen theory, we can think of like I'm trying to think of infection methods, which I know is not exactly what we're thinking here for cultural memes. But
Okay.
my understanding is that like talk therapy is usually between like a one-on-one between like a therapist and a patient. And the
Yes.
12 step program, at least within media, is like a group of, a group of people around them. Like a group of
Yes.
people kind of sitting in a circle saying, hi, my name is X, I'm an alcoholic, right? Um,
Yes.
and so maybe in that way, the infection method is like, there's a different kind of infection methods where it's like a group of people who all are reinforcing this. It's like visualize. This is
No,
why I should
I get
probably
it.
formalize the thought here.
Yeah, I get it, Nathan. And of course you're right. Those are differences. But I believe that if I asked a cognitive behavioral therapist whether treating alcoholism by cognitive behavioral therapy is better than 12-step programs, they could give me a litany of reasons why cognitive behavioral therapy was better than 12-step programs. And they could even probably present me with, quote, scientific data, unquote, that shows it is more successful. Well, we followed up these people for 5 years and right? Okay. Of course, you got to watch out because probably such studies are done by cognitive behavioral therapists.
Right.
And I mean, maybe they're not, but possibly they are. And if you asked a 12-step person, then perhaps they could do the same.
Mhm.
They could show you studies, perhaps done by those sympathetic to 12-step programs, showing that their approach works better. Okay. So the issue is, does Preen theory have anything to say about which of these is uh, more useful in helping an alcoholic quit?
Oh, I was going to say, just to kind of respond to that, um, whenever you start talking about, the research studies, alarm bells went off my head, relating to like the silver star of truth as opposed to any sort of gold star.
Yes, yes. Uh, and it should, right? So when we take the Preen theoretic point of view, I don't see that we can answer, well, I don't see anything that says one is better than the other. You should go to one or the other, preferably, uh, if you're an alcoholic and want to quit. I don't know, because what I do see is their process seems to me to have much in common with each other. They are both trying to put new memes in your head because that's basically all they can do without physical intervention. And since we can't remove memes from your brain by volition, all that can be done is put new ones in, it seems to me. Now, so that's a different view than any view you might have in normal life, right? Uh, and is it useful? I think it is, but I just wanted to bring up that example. Okay.
It may be that when the brain records a meme, some form of priority rating is associated with it. Presumably the rating assigned is determined by the brain based on the constellation of signals it is receiving. This priority rating may be just one form of metadata that through time the brain may associate with a meme. Others may include a learned name, utterance, for the meme, an image, a learned emotional response, see cultural preens and the perception of emotions.
Okay. So this is something that, because of the class, I've thought about more recently. And the importance of this metadata, it seems to me, it has grown for me, and I want to discuss it with you guys. Okay, so uh, what okay, so let's start with you all have an apple. I don't mean a computer, I mean the fruit. Uh, uh, meme in your heads, right? I mean, you can go to the world and say that's an apple and that's not, right? Okay. Now, what meta data is associated with your Apple uh, meme? Uh, Mike Tirikoff?
Yeah, I just have a quick comment about
Yeah.
metadata. I think like in my mind, it would be fruit, which was very interesting that you had to like preface the comment with not a computer. So it's kind of so fascinating how a company became so like culturally influential that that statement even had to be uttered.
It's a
So
good point, right? Yeah. So you're right. Um, and it shows us that the brain has a lot to deal with, right? It's got these two different views of you have two different apple brains. Okay, but let's take your the fruit apple meme. What metadata is associated with it? It's the meme that allows us um, to tell what's an apple from what physical things get apple labels and what physical things don't. Kushan Khalid Indi.
yes,
Khalid Indi.
I think if we're talking about metadata, it's kind of like a just like kind of attributes we ascribe to the apple, then there would be like physical characteristics like color, shape, like weight or something like that. I guess every apple is different, so there's probably like a range of shapes that are associated with that in the metadata, and also
Mhm.
like I guess since sensory characteristics too, like it tends to taste like an apple or something that tends to taste like that.
Yeah, I like it. So I think, for example, the taste. When I think part of the metadata that we associate with our Apple memes is sweet, right? Tastes sweet. I mean, there can be exceptions, but basically, it doesn't taste unpleasant. Okay. Uh, wait a minute. Things are behaving badly. Okay. Yes. Uh, Akriti Shaw, please.
Yeah. To add to that, I would also say a part of an apple's metadata would like be the type, like Granny Smith or like whatever type it is.
No,
No,
I would
okay.
say it's not,
Okay.
because I would say that you may have another meme in your head, which is the Granny Smith apple
Oh, okay,
meme.
okay.
Okay. But I wouldn't say that's a metadata on your apple.
Okay.
There may be some connection between the two,
Hmm.
two different ones. I don't know. And this all has to do with we're computer scientists. We can imagine all sorts of ways to relate different
Right.
pieces of information. So you may be right, but at least for right now,
Okay, gotcha.
I'm thinking of it differently. Oh, okay, now I get it. Yes, Ryan.
I think we've sort of glossed over one important piece of metadata associated with our Apple preen, which is there should be like some sort of lookup table disambiguation kind of like metadata associated with it. Because as we already said, like when you said Apple, you immediately said not the technology company, the fruit.
Hmm.
And I think that's a like an important piece of metadata that's like associated with many different preens. Another one that I kind of want to just bring to the table is like context that you picked it up, because at least in my mind, there's like sort of a different level of like uncertainty associated with things depending on where you picked something up.
Uh, I, what things are we talking about picking up?
So like if you gained an idea for something, so like let's say you have an idea that you're not really sure about, but you can't really prove or disprove it, but you learned it from some sketchy website online. You'll
Hmm.
probably trust it less than if you learned it from, say, your college professor. But also, if your college
Oh,
professor has been wrong many, many times in lecture, you'll probably start associating the things that you learn from that professor with a little bit less of like a trust label. So I definitely think
Yeah.
there's like a trustworthiness like piece of
Yeah.
metadata.
Yeah, there may be. There may be. That's a possibility. When you say apple to me, or okay, if I start talking about apples or your apple meme, um, does a vision pop into your mind of an apple? Right? I mean, it does for me. Okay. Mike Tirikoff?
Yeah, I think maybe part of the metadata could be kind of like the actual word in some sense. Because the second you said
Bingo.
apples, like the technology company automatically disappears from my head.
Bi- Bingo. Okay. So for me, that's a big ticket item, but we'll get to it in a second. Okay, so we were talking about though the question of does an image pop into your mind when I say apple? And I would suspect it does for me. I think of some apple, right? And pretty much whenever we talk about apples, it's that image that initially pops into my mind. It's like if I say elephant, you have a couple of images of them, samples, you could say. And so I think that those are metadata that has become associated, those images, with your Apple, uh, well, with your Apple meme set. Okay, and then the one that Mike Terakoff suggested, which is one that I think might be particularly important, is I said here, other may include learned names, utterances for the meme. So I said apple, but I could have, if I was a polyglot, which I'm the opposite of. Okay, who speaks another language than than English and can tell me what other language? How do you say apple?
I can do French.
Okay, yeah, right.
C'est une pomme de terre, fruit of the earth.
Oh yeah, pomme de terre. Thank you. That makes sense. Okay.
Or is it just pomme? Maybe pomme de terre is potato.
Ah, you know, your credibility is I just took a hit. Okay, so anyway, yes. John,
Yeah, in Portuguese, it's maçã.
massa?
Maçã. It's it has a tilde over the a. It's not a sound that's usually heard in English words, and it actually, in my name, there's also that usually that tilde over the a. It's one of the reasons it's hard to pronounce.
Yes, and I've been notably unsuccessful at it. So I think we're going to stick with the French palm. Okay, thank you. All
Sounds
right,
good.
so, huh? Yeah,
Oh, I just said sounds good. Let's stick with the
okay.
French.
Yeah, let's stick with the French. Okay, so now, uh, how did the name Apple get associated? What was the process by which it got associated as metadata with your Apple preen, your Apple meme? How did that happen?
Probably learned the word in school.
Yes, you might have learned it in school. I
Or maybe
sort of
before
think,
that at home.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I would think that the cases I can consider, it's learned at home. You know, some parent holds up this thing, it's an apple, and they say, apple. Maybe the baby or the young child has learned to reach out for an apple because it's already learned sweet, right? But maybe the parent goes, apple, holds it back for a little bit, apple, and then gives it to him, right? So if you're French, presumably the same thing happens, but the utterance is pomme. Yeah. And we understand where that metadata came from, I think, typically at least, right? You learned it. You learned it probably from your parents, perhaps in school, right? But you learned it. And by the way, if you ran into someone who was French, you might go through a process where one of you'd hold up an apple and say, apple, apple. And the other person would say, I don't know the process, and this is a little facile. Palm, pointing to the same object, palm. And you would therefore learn that in his language, their language, it must be a word for the same thing. Yeah. So I have for a long time been thinking about, language, because languages evolve and do all these things, but I've not been able to put it into a pre-theoretic framework. But now I think I have a clue as to what's maybe going on in these languages. Yes. So any other thoughts on that?
I have a quick question. I know we've been kind of talking about learned names. Um,
Yeah.
it can we think of these as should we think of these as kind of like an array of these kind of names, apple, palm, and all the other names we have here, or do we think of them as like maybe this kind of ties into the language open question that we have? Do we think of them as backlinks to word preens?
Okay, I did ask a question about language as one of the possible topics.
Right.
Okay, but I think this is the best clue I've had so far on on what language is about. Okay. But I didn't understand this backlink, or what were you
Uh,
saying?
I guess that kind of just really asks the question, is the learned name encoded in the preen itself, or does it kind of reference a preen that you have in your brain that recognizes that specific utterance?
Well, this has to do with this question, I think.
Mhm.
Our metadatum, yeah, our metadatum preens
Mhm.
themselves. And I think the answer has to be yes. They're stored in your brain, right? The utterance apple, or palm. So I think the answer is yes. It is, these utterances are metadata. They are preens themselves, but they've been wired together by whatever the organization in the brain is in for using data. That's my thought. Okay, John Machado.
Yeah, I was gonna add maybe a different framework, but
Yes.
I'm far from a specialist in AI and large language models, but I understand that there's this idea where you're trying to predict how a sentence is going to unfold, And you, instead of doing it word for word, you do it through tokens, which are subparts, or they're at a different conceptual level than words themselves. And
Okay.
so while I can't explain how that works, I think that's an interesting example, because LLMs are very impressive in their ability to deal with languages. And I don't know if this idea of tokens, I think tokens are also information. And so there's probably some sort of link with preens, from tokens to preens, which might even, I don't know, might even relate to this metadata idea, or it might be a different lens in general. So I'm sure someone in the class is more knowledgeable about tokenization than I am, but
Yeah, and thanks, John. Yes, and I'm hoping Isabel Lee is such a person. So, Isabel, tell us what's going on, please.
With regards to specifically, I wasn't sure what the question was.
Okay. Well, ask your question, and then we'll ask you some questions, maybe.
Oh, yeah, no, I was more gonna make a comment about this because like the way you described preen and language reminded me of like Platonic theory of language, because like that's another class that I'm taking right now, is like
Oh, okay. Wait. What's the what theory of language?
Platonic theory of language.
Oh, Platonic. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so like where do language come from? And like I think Plato, and recently it was um McCarthy, the one who wrote about wars, they both thought language came from like physical objects, or like like visual images or things like that. But I think modern linguists like tend to disagree with that, because language is very encoded in like how we reason and stuff. So I think modern linguists generally seem to think that language is actually like the unit of like reasoning and information. So I think in a lot of like fields in NLP, we've like moved away from like, we used to want to like extract information from language. But like if you think about like LLMs, we just straight up use language for data, like rather than using language to data mine. So I think like the language and the way we think about language has like shifted significantly in machine learning, at least. So
Okay.
yeah, we now directly use it, almost like we kind of like how we parse like DNA, like it's like an information in and of itself, and it has like its own like formulas and stuff, rather than learning to process language manually. We can like use it directly as like a form of vector. So I thought that was like a very interesting parallel that was like really relevant to me. So
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. But what's clear to me is that I don't really understand modern AI, and I would certainly like to get a better understanding of it. Um, okay, Ryan, are you gonna enlighten me?
I was just gonna respond a little bit to Isabel's point about
Yes.
uh, I guess language being used as a like an intermediate feature. So I come back from, or I come from a vision background. I have not quite yet taken an NLP course, but I will in the future. My understanding of current AI is that we're using language as this like, as Isabel put it, like this like information representation more out of convenience than out of like it being appropriate in my mind. So I think there's still a layer under language that's like, in the context of AI, this would be like the latent representation that's like deeper. But I think because humans need something above that in order to like actually communicate their ideas, I think we use that instead because it's so much associated with our training data. So the reason I think this is, I suspect if you have a child and you never teach them like any language and you
Yeah.
just like let them grow up, I think they'll still know how to think because I think that's different, but they won't have their thoughts in a language per se.
Okay, so if you grow up raised by wolves or something like that, you'll still be able to think, we think, but you well, but your thoughts, okay, versus somebody who grows up in the usual way and learns a language. And the idea is that our thoughts then, if we've learned a language, use the language as part of the processing of reasoning and everything like that. And whereas if we were raised by wolves, we would not use it that way. I mean, we would still think, but it wouldn't rely on the process of language. Um, okay, that's interesting.
I
Um,
mean,
oh,
one
I'm sorry.
counterpoint. Yeah, sorry. One counterpoint though. I think there has been studies like that, like with language and like also like NLP. Like I think people
Wait. What is this NLP?
natural language processing. So
Yes, okay.
yeah, large
Okay.
language models.
Yeah.
Like I think people
Oh, wait, natural language processing and large
that's my field.
language.
Yeah.
Wait. Hold on, Isabel. I know what large language models are. And now you're talking about natural language processing. But when you say natural language processing, it's not identical to large language models. They're different things, right?
No, they're not the same thing. Natural language processing is the field that LLMs have kind of eaten up. Like,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. So natural language processing, people who were investigating that were basically, or at least part of their study was, well, what is, um, how do people think? And they seem to use language as part of the way they think, and that's part of natural language processing. Okay.
Yeah.
But large language models, AI, have sort of, you said beaten up on that, right?
They've kind of like eaten the field alive, essentially, because
Yes.
it used to be that like we wanted to like extract like reasoning structures and things like that from language, but
Yes.
we actually found out that if you just tokenize them and turn them into vectors and you just like feed it to like giant spaces of models, they learn these reasoning structures emergently. Like
Yes. I see. Right. Okay. This is helping me at least move from total ignorance to something epsilon better. All right. So now, okay. But, mm, okay. So what I've touched on here is where we get the words of natural from. And I also, um, and those words, I think, are used in communication. And when they're used in communication, we, you know, presumably think that those words are the words of our language. Okay. It doesn't go beyond that at this point to say, there are grammars or there are these vectors or any of that, right? But it does seem to me a tenable position so far of where our words come from and why societies, will have different words in their language, utterances. When I say words, I mean utterances, though spelling them is another thing. Okay. So, but this idea, which is apparently one of natural language processing, that we use language to reason, I'm skeptical. Okay. I'm skeptical that I'm skeptical because as I'm about to touch on here, I believe that much of our language processing is um, subconscious, and we don't have a clue as to what's going on. And
Plato would agree with you.
oh, you don't agree with me?
No, Plato and McCarthy would agree with you.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't agree with Plato on a few things either. So, there's a problem. I mean, there is a chapter in the book called Socrates' Bed in DTT, where I guess I take exception with Plato. Okay. So, you know, I I take exception with everything. Okay, so okay, but uh I suspect that the um the way our brains think about things, the subconscious part of our brains, doesn't rely on language. Okay. Uh, and I'll give an example of that. So I want to continue on this because I need to learn something about it if I'm, going to think about this more. All right. Um, all right. So Ryan, please.
I was going to add, I think language might be important more so in memory than in actual thought because um, it turns out that if you can make chunks, if you can relate new information to bigger chunks that you already have stored, it's less expensive to store that new information. So how that relates to language is that you can use these, words or just like concepts from language that are much more like information dense than whatever like lower representation that we abstract into words.
Okay. So okay, can you give me an example? I did get a sense of what you're talking about for sure.
So okay. And there are studies that support this. The people that can so like I don't remember where I read this. I think it was on Wikipedia, but um, there was a study on like the ability to memorize things, and one person who was able to like memorize things exceptionally well had for some reason memorized like a whole bunch of like sports statistics like race times or
Mhm.
something. And so
Yeah.
when they were asked to memorize like a sequence of random numbers, they literally were in their mind just going like, okay, well, this substring is, so and so's winning time from 1939 or
Yes.
what. And so they would like construct it out of these larger chunks that were already in their mind. So this kind of, I made a comment in the chat about like, I think this relates to like information theory. So like when you compress something with like a compression algorithm, if you can come up with a dictionary that is like made up of larger, more abstract ideas. Like, okay, say
Yeah.
say you want to compress images, and we know that our set of all possible images only actually contains two images. There's an image of a smiley face and an image of a frowny face. In order to compress this optimally, you actually only need one bit per image. Is it
Hmm.
happy or not? But if your dictionary includes all other possible images, then you need a lot more information. So I think
Yes.
what words are doing is they're sort of compressing all of these things that you would like associate with a word into that word itself. So now instead of having to think about like, okay, when I think of apple, I need to think of all of the things that are like related to Apple. I can just sort of compress those into Apple.
Yes, and I do understand what you're getting at. Uh, uh, okay, I get it. Yes, it is like compression, but of course we know that compression, uh, uh, no compression algorithm that doesn't lose, well, okay, I won't go into it. There's, of course, information theory is well studied, and there's a lot of things we could say about it. But thank you. So we're going to continue on this, but okay, Kushal
Hi, yeah,
Khalidindi.
yeah. I just kind of yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about that, like the I just wanted to clarify a few things too. Like, so you mentioned the first example, like um that when you say, utter the word apple, like an image just kind of pops in your head immediately, and it's kind of introduced through like someone will show, like maybe your mother showed you an apple, and she was like, "This is an apple," and then you ate, and then you kind of generated the metadata yourself, I guess.
Yeah, well, you
Um,
learned, yeah, through that process, you came
yeah,
to
I think
apply that metadata.
I think like I don't know. I guess like I'm wondering like how could preens even like exist without like some like a language, like without there being some sort of language in the first place? Like I think that's something I'm kind of wondering. Like
Well,
like I guess I'm it's interesting hearing people like discuss like how like the idea that language is not necessarily for like thinking, and
mhm.
like you could still go about the world and like operate the same way, but but I think it's kind of more than just like a classification tool. Like I I don't know. I was remembering like an argument I had with my mom one day. I thought it would be smart and tell my mom about how I learned that like a cucumber isn't a fruit, or like an apple, like a
Uh-huh.
tomato. And I like tried to be like, what I asked her like, what is a cucumber? She's like, it's a vegetable. She's like, no, I mean, I'm like, it's actually a fruit. She's like, you're stupid. And I think like it's in it more than just like a compression. I guess there's different compression algorithms. So like depending on the way you compress a file or whatever, like you might get a different result, slightly different types of artifacting or whatever. I think like m- I think more even the way you classify something and types of metadata you use to classify do you try to pick up on to classify something? I think that that sort of reflects like philosophy, like the way you think, the way you start to compress things into words and stuff like that. I think that that is really relevant, and I don't think you could really operate. I don't think you would operate the same if language did exist. Like I think
I, I,
or didn't
I,
exist.
I think I basically agree with you. You may operate differently if you don't have language, but I think you can still operate. But yeah, so part of the process we're involved in here, and largely in all research, is to take all of those views, and you have many, and so do all of us, I think, on what language is about and what it does. We probably have many views, but one of the goals is to look into this morass of different ideas and try to say, can we distill out something of importance that really helps us understand it? And uh, I think we're on the road to that a little bit, but we're not there.
Basically, because like I think a lot of the discussions that we've had so far are that language doesn't seems to be like end all be all. And like I mean, I also don't have like a linguistics background. Um, my background is very different, but I think of like language as like a very good approximation of like the information that we have, and it seems to be like the natural thing that we as like people sort of gravitate towards, like in terms of communicating, reasoning, or information. Even if we like take away like your normal forms of speech or abilities, people seem to find a way towards language. So like it, even when they like don't have, you know, like access to like sight or something like that, they come up with their own like method of communication, which ends up looking a lot like language. And I think even for animals, like they tend to sort of gravitate towards that as well. I mean, like people who grew up like amongst animals, they eventually develop something similar akin to like language, even in the absence of that. So there's something kind of natural about it, like that people seem to gravitate towards. But I, as like a, I guess mathematical modeler is like what I think of myself as, and like I think it's a really good approximation of like information or reasoning that we have, like in terms of like a structure that we want to model.
Okay. Um, yeah, I have come up with a hypothesis. Actually, it's just a talking point, right? 'Cause, um, my suspicion is, and we'll get to it soon, is that our unconscious minds do not use language, and that language is a mechanism used by our conscious minds. Okay. And I'm going to give an example of why I think that, but not right away. Uh, John Machado.
Yes, so we were discussing in the chat a little more. Um, so so Ryan pointed to the maybe there's a role that can be explained with information theory, and so I think it's true that when we use a concept often enough, a new concept often enough, and it's laborious to explain it, then we create a word for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think so language would be a very useful encoding for these situations. And perhaps what is going on is sort of an energy minimization process, in that processing information is laborious, it takes energy, and we tend to minimize energy use. That tends to be beneficial. So maybe their language is just one, let's say, one layer in a hierarchy of information representations. And so I hope that was clear, but and
No, it made some sense. Was it clear? Well, no, but it made as much sense as many of the things we're saying. Yes, please go on.
yeah, no, so if we think about these layers of information encoding, if we think about preens as information, maybe preens are the most fundamental layer, let's say, and then there are layers on top of which language is maybe one of them. And I do think the role of energy might be one
Yeah,
use.
I mean this is very reminiscent of what are called Hoffman codes and things like that, right? That's sort of the thing you're talking about. All right, catcher.
I was just wondering, so you said that basically you think language is articulating what's happening in the unconscious and like consciousness. So what would you say then? Would you say that like whales or dolphins and all these animals we're discovering are they have their own language? Would you say they're conscious too? Or and going back to the ideas we had about ants and whether or not ants have preens, would that what's your
Yeah,
thought on all of that?
really good question. Okay. And I don't know, but I like the question a lot. So yes. Uh, I don't know. But, we're in the midst of trying to figure out very big issues here, or at least get a little greater insight into them. Language has been considered for a long time. All right. Okay. So, uh, I want to finish off this chapter. The chapter we're doing is how the brain captures memes, right? And I've expressed the idea that uh, when you capture a meme, you might associate with it metadata, right? And one particular form of that might be uh, what we call you might assign a priority. I just called it a priority to memes that you capture. So I'm going to give an example.
For example, perhaps an exceptionally high rating would be assigned when sexual fulfillment is first achieved, if heroin is injected for the first time, if you were kidnapped or sexually assaulted.
Okay, that I'm saying those events are different, not in kind, but from the memes you get when you, let's see, oh, I don't know. You might acquire when you uh, get your pinky finger uh, caught in a drawer or something. Not in a hard way, but you might realize then that, gee, not good to do that, right? But these kind of events would, I think, uh, uh, be given a higher priority, right, than other events. These are, what would, uh, uh, okay. Okay, so I'm going to
Call
call
such
such
memes
memes.
pivotal memes. They are the footprints left by major life events, and a great amount of energy and brain cycles may be invested in planning future behavior as a result of them. Consider the examples above. Would you think about, i.e., process, them repeatedly in the future?
Okay, so um, if you, and presumably you have, experienced some of these things above, all right? And I would say that if you experienced any one of these things above, you would not just think about it, today I gotta not put my finger, get it caught in that thing, right? Those kind of thoughts, you work out a future behavior, not getting your finger caught, uh, fairly rapidly, and you probably wouldn't think about it again for the rest of your life. But uh, you're going to think about any of these other things that I've listed for the rest of your life. Yes, that is uh, in the sexual fulfillment situation. I would say that you are likely to think about it constantly and design your future behavior because of that experience, right? I mean, I think that's fairly obvious. Okay, so I'm going to call those kind of memes that get a very high uh, priority, pivotal memes. Okay, and such pivotal memes. Okay, so
Call such memes pivotal memes. They are the footprints left by major life events, and a great amount of energy and brain cycles may be invested in planning future behavior as a result of them. Consider the examples above. Would you think about, i.e., process, them repeatedly in the future? Your brain might be likened to a bell. The harder it's struck, the longer it reverberates. Pivotal memes come from striking the bell with great force, and the reverberations persist for a very long time as our brains repeatedly process them to plan a better future. When pivotal memes are acquired in negative situations, we sometimes call the result post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. When acquired in positive situations, perhaps we should call the result post-ecstatic stress disorder, PSD. Figure 20.
And then we get to this figure. Okay. So PTSD and PESD, when the ringing won't stop. Yes? So of course, positing here that these are just the same phenomena. And that, we call it PTSD when it's bad, and pivotal preen is bad, and we call it we don't call it. I'm suggesting we call it PESD, post-ecstatic uh, uh, stress disorder, when it's good. Okay, so for example, my understanding is that people who shoot up heroin for the first time enjoy it. Okay, and that once they've done that, or if they've done it a few times, they will start planning their lives around doing it again. And, if you become very addicted, whatever that means, you're going to spend every day thinking about how you're going to get the next experience, right? Okay. So, what do you think? Does that work for you? Do you think that's correct? Do you think it's not correct? Do you think that the thing we call PTSD is a process that is essentially identical to what I'm calling PESD? You're all stunned with the brilliance, or you don't want to say you disagree, or some other thing. What do you think of it? Anybody? Okay, well, we can go on. Especially if you disagree, I'd like to hear about it because, I certainly could be wrong. Okay, so that's the end of that. Mike, straighten me out on this issue.
I just had kind of a quick question. Like PESD kind of sounds like a little bit like nostalgia to me, but I don't know if I'm like looking into it differently. Like, would you agree that they're kind of similar or no?
Wait. Nostalgia. No, no. Okay, maybe I need to understand better what you're talking about. Please elaborate.
Yeah, I just like I've heard the word nostalgia a lot, and I kind of maybe I don't know exactly what it means, but it kind of seems like wishful thinking of the past, which
Yeah, okay.
sounds like a little bit like the inverse of PTSD to me. I'm not sure.
Okay, I see it differently, I think. Um, w- what I'm suggesting is big events happen in your life. Like if you shoot heroin, it's a big event in your life. And we can imagine that this event, for example, produces, results in your brain that send the needle of pleasure way beyond where it's been before. And that needle of pleasure, not that there really is a needle, is sort of pinned when heroin is injected. Yes? People like it. And I'm saying when a meme is recorded, there may be metadata associated with it, which is how far did the pleasure needle move? It would be much more complex than that, but that's an idea, right? Whereas if, for example, you are kidnapped, I think the displeasure needle might get pinned. You're frightened, everything else, right? And so it would get a very negative score. And it's those kind of events that we relive continuously. And we do it so that we can design our future behavior to avoid what the bad thing or to uh, uh, enhance the good thing. We design our lives around it.
That
Nostalgia
makes
is
sense. Yeah, I was gonna say like the word pivotal helps me out a lot. I don't think there's like
okay.
anything pivotal about nostalgia, but with like
No,
like
it isn't.
it makes sense.
Okay. All right. Anthony, carry on. Oh, carry on. Yes, Anthony, carry on.
I wouldn't disagree with you. I'd for sure agree with you. On the aspect that like let's just say PESD is releasing a lot of dopamine, and I don't know, maybe like the first time you do heroin is like maybe every single time after that you're trying to get to that level of highness that you were that first time, and maybe like that dopamine just you keep fiending for that dopamine.
Yeah,
Um, Same thing with not really with PTSD. I mean, obviously, like you're not fiending for the dopamine that
right.
but
It's now avoidance of something.
yeah, definitely. But I feel like for sure like your survival instincts tells you that that the extremes that you should be ready for the extremes because that's how you'll know how to react to these extreme actions or reactions or events.
I'm suggesting that this is a mechanism that's been built into our brains. And
Yes.
it's a mechanism that says, monitor, this is, I don't know that this is the detail of how it actually works, but monitor the constellation of chemicals in your brain. And as long as they stay within a certain, acceptable levels, then it's just an event. When they get a little higher, then we'll turn on the meme recorder. When the constellation goes off the chart, then we'll assign it a much higher priority than if it was just got a lesser priority because they didn't go off the chart, but they reached a level where we turned on the meme recorder. Okay. And it's these big going off the charts, which I'm calling pivotal memes. And I'm suggesting that a lot of processing, when you get a pivotal mean, a lot of processing is going to take place from that point on, probably throughout your life, because your genes want you to avoid bad situations and want you to embrace positive situations. Now, in the case of sexual fulfillment, they want you to pursue more of that, right? But heroin is sort of, uh, exploited that, you could say. And you can be transferred to pursuing more heroin. Yes. That's the point of view. Okay.
Professor, I have one more point to add on to that I'm curious about.
Jason, yes, please.
I was wondering, because like in terms of like I don't know if you ever watched Breaking Bad, but like
Yeah, I love that.
like a lot of addicts are in search of like the next high, you know what I
Of
mean?
course.
So I was wondering what you think of is PTSD like what like traumas tend to stick with you, and I think they kind of stack on top of each other, you know, like one trauma will not replace another trauma. Like that you'll just be more traumatized with all of these traumas. But then in terms
Okay.
of PESD, I'm wondering if a heroin user ends up getting hooked on fentanyl, if that PESD for heroin that they possess might actually kind of dissipate and then be replaced by their PESD for fentanyl, something like that. Something
My,
stronger.
yeah, it's a good question. I, I, I think you're basically right. Something like that is going on. So if a person becomes addicted to heroin and the heroin dries up, they they may, or even if it doesn't dry up, they may try fentanyl, and that also will send the constellation of chemicals
Mhm.
off the chart. And that may also become a pivotal meme. And those two pivotal memes will have to live with each other, right?
And that's where I'm wondering, actually, even from like an addict's brain, if they'd be completely forgetting about heroin and only, um, existing for the purpose of the chemistry that fentanyl provides them, you know?
Yes, yes. I understand that. I I don't believe they're going to completely forget about anything, whether it rises to the level that they think about it anymore, heroin, once this better drug is available, if it's better, I don't
Yeah.
know. Then yes, it may diminish in importance, and they'll spend more time thinking about how to get the fentanyl and less time about how to get the heroin.
Which probably could be like a whole time suck conversation in itself. Because I like my sister, she deals with addicts. She's training to be a therapist and do her doctorate in
Mhm.
psychology. And there's just so much that goes into it too. That's like a whole different science, I guess, within itself. But yeah, that was just one thought I had. So
No, I like the thought, and you know, get your sister in here. I'd
I'll
like
drag her
that.
in.
Yes, please. All right. Yeah. So good. Um, End of that detour, but it's going to be short-lived because we've got another detour. And this one will get us back involved in these questions of of language and uh, metadata and stuff like that. Okay. So let's start with a question for us. What is human creativity?
Uh, I guess it's like your ability to take your experiences and so whatever, like, I think this also relates to like the personally created memes that we talked about before, but like your ability to synthesize past experiences into new ones that I think also are slightly biased towards things that are like cultural value preens appreciate because we tend not to think of new useless things as creative. Like, look, guys, I made a scribble. No one's really excited about it.
Mhm. Well, I think you're right, and I think the basically right, and I think that you've given a good theoretic answer. Yes. On the other hand, if we ask a musician, where did you get the idea for that song? or a author or a poet, where did you get the idea for that, right? Or even a mathematician. How did you suddenly figure out how to prove that, right? What are they likely to say as normal people and not Green theorists? What kind of answers do you get?
I mean, I think
That
even, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that they're maybe influenced by past like music or artists or books that they got inspired by.
Yes, but that's not what I meant. That's more on the pre-theoretic side.
Okay.
What if you go up to a poet and you say, "Where did the idea for that poem come from?" He ain't a pre-theorist, okay? And so what's he or she, what are they going to say? What are they going to say? I mean, I've seen interviews like this. Yes.
I do feel like a lot of artists are willing to attribute their inspiration. So like especially within music, I think a lot of artists will say like, "Oh, I was heavily influenced by blah," or like a poet might say, I really enjoyed reading Charles Dickens, and I was inspired to write this. Although also literature is the
You
function of
get
our personal experiences.
now that I've made you into preen theorists, you guys can't release it. Okay. I've seen interviews like this. Where did the idea from the for this music come from? And the or this poem or this proof. They say, "Oh, it just came to me." Right? And they say things like, "I was just sitting around one day and this tune came into my mind." Yes. Or they will say, uh, "I don't know." Or they say, "Well, it was like a bolt of lightning. It came out of nowhere, right? It just happened, and then I knew it. I was sitting around having coffee and this tune, or whatever." That's the way I've seen it described a million, not a million, uh, many, many times. You can go, it's a standard interview question, right? Where did you get the idea for this great song? Well, Ted and I were just sitting around and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, yes, that is, I think, what I see most often normal people who aren't preen theorists say about their inspirations. Some say, it- remember we talked about this being a vessel for some larger, greater thing like God or something. They say, well, I'm just a vessel and God spoke through me, or some words to that effect. But that's not what the preen theorists would say, and as you guys are well aware. Okay, so we're gonna discuss that issue.
How your brain processes memes. When you cannot think of a name and it suddenly pops into your head, that name was almost certainly discovered by your subconscious while processing your memes and was then forwarded to the conscious part of the brain.
Do you buy that? Yes. So, of course, it didn't just pop into your head, right? God didn't put it there. The muse didn't put it there. You couldn't think of the name, and in your subconscious, a bunch of processing took place. And then when your subconscious discovered the name you were looking for, it sent you a notification. Boom, here's the name. Yes? All right. So,
By your subconscious while processing your memes and was then forwarded to the conscious part of the brain. The conscious part of your brain is not informed of the details of the subconscious processing, only the result.
So, right? You don't know what happened in your subconscious. Obviously, a lot of processing took place. Presumably it was, doing something to find that name that you wanted, but you never consciously are aware of what that subconscious processing was. Yes? You don't know what steps were taken. You just got notified of the result. Okay.
This subconscious processing occurs all the time. For example, it appears to continue while we sleep. If during sleep, a meme of value is generated, then a notification may be posted for the conscious part of the brain. When we wake, we find the notification and have an "I got it" sense.
We go, oh, right? So I had such an example, and I'm going to describe it because I think it's interesting and because I think it will help us on these other discussions we're having, or not. But here we go. This is true, of
For
course.
example, I once woke with the certainty that I could finally prove a theorem I had been struggling with for months. I went to my blackboard and had the bizarre but pleasant experience of writing the proof that, at that moment, the conscious part of my brain was seeing for the first time. While the conscious part of my brain received the notification and the proof, I suspect that my subconscious had done a great deal of processing that I was not, and would never be, conscious of.
Right? I mean, that happened to me. I mean, it was totally bizarre, but it happens frequently to me, actually, where I woke up and I go, oh, I have an aha moment, right? And in this case, it in this setting, it's particularly interesting because in this example, I actually went to a blackboard I had in my house and began writing the proof. I was sure I had a proof, but my conscious mind had never seen the proof before. And my conscious mind only learned the proof, which was correct, uh, at that moment. Okay. And did I understand what processing my subconscious mind did? I did not. That was not part of what got sent to me, to my consciousness. Um, okay. Isabel.
Just a really quick comment. 'Cause I think this reminds me of Poincaré. He talks about like subconscious processing a lot too.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, and like what you just described, like reminds me of like this article he wrote about like subconscious processing, and he believes that like that's why he believes in like not working for like a couple days. Like he would actively avoid work to let his subconscious work. Like yeah, it just reminded me of that.
Yes, and that's interesting. I did not know that about Poincaré. Uh, uh, maybe if there's a convenient, well, I guess I can look it up. Poincaré
I can
is,
email it to you. Yeah.
yeah, please. I'd appreciate that. Okay, and now I have used this as a tool. Okay, and you might try it yourself. I became so accustomed to doing a lot of my mathematics or other scientific work subconsciously while I slept, and that I began to rely on it. So when I would wake up in the morning, I would spend the first, let's say, 30 minutes exploring what my subconscious had come up with. And it was almost invariably really, really good. So it's a technique you might try, right? Don't, it says, don't allow yourself to get distracted immediately when you wake. That is, reserve some time to explore what you've learned while you slept. Okay, it worked for me. It still works for me. There's a bit of bad news because when I'd wake up and, this main problem I was working on, my subconscious hadn't sent me anything. I'd be somewhat unhappy. All right. So, but oh well, let me just put this
Because
next.
long arduous subconscious processing sometimes generates memes of value that are transmitted to the conscious part of the brain without any details of how they were obtained. There is a tendency for people to believe that something magical, divine, or inspired is involved in human creativity.
Because for the human, it does seem like it just came out of nowhere in an instant, but it didn't. Yes. Okay. Now, I guess for the last topic that we'll discuss, this example, I think I want to look at in terms of our discussion of language and processing. Okay, so what happened there was I believe my subconscious processed all this stuff and finally actually figured out a proof and then notified me of it, my conscious mind of it. So my question is, did the subconscious part of my brain use language at all?
Maybe when it communicated to the conscious part, and maybe that's the only place it used it.
Yes, and that's what I'm hypothesizing could be correct, right? That is, the unconscious processing that takes place. Why do we think it involves language? And maybe it's just the way brains have evolved to process information. And it has nothing to do with language. And maybe the boy or girl who's raised by the wolves, that's still going on. What ends up being communicated to the conscious part of the person is, I don't know, but some language seems involved in people who have language in this transmission of these discoveries to the conscious part of the brain. So, in fact, once I got the notification, you have a proof, I went to the blackboard and I was able to write it out. Yes. And that of course was using language, mathematical language, but language. So my question is, how did that passage take place? Did the subconscious really translate it for me into language that my conscious brain would understand? And it had basically sent me the entire proof in a language I understood, and I just wrote it out on the board. Or was the passage different? It seems to me that it sent me pretty much the whole proof. I mean, I just went to the board and started writing it. Okay, so Isabel, help us.
I was just curious, like, maybe it uses like almost like in latent space, you use a different language, maybe, and it's like
Wait,
almost
wait, in what space?
in like a almost like in like large language model learning, like you have like a latent space learning, right? maybe that's what people do, like when they're subconsciously processing, like you just have a latent space learning and then it's communicated or translated to a language that you know.
Yes. Now, I don't know the terms you used. I mean, they're terms of art in AI, and I want to understand more specifically what you meant. But that's sort of what I'm exploring. What we're exploring here is, does the unconscious brain uh, use language at all? And the
Yeah.
hypothesis is, and you know, I don't know if this is correct, is that it does not. All right. And that uh, it's the conscious part of the brain that uses language, and that
Why? Why
oh,
not?
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. I know why. So you can communicate with other people.
No, I mean, like, why do you think we don't use language in subconscious brain?
Because I think we probably arose evolutionarily to have at least vestigial versions, not vestigial, to have em embryonic, well, to have versions of subconscious processing that didn't involve language. Why would they? So, for example, does some subconscious processing occur in wolves? I'm going to talk about that in a little while, but I would say yes, that wolves are subconsciously processing. Do they have language? Maybe a little bit. You know, they howl to one another, but they don't have a language like we have, whatever that exactly means. But they have this processing, which will call unconscious processing, which arose largely before languages, or at least sophisticated languages, arose. So as evolution went on, it kept growing, and because it was useful, and humans ended up with it too. But they also had a need to have sophisticated communications with others, and languages, what you need for that. All right, John, you're first.
Thanks. I just wanted to contradict something I said before, which, so I said that the subconscious part used language to communicate what was discovered to the conscious part, but maybe it doesn't even need to do that. So I was thinking, when you're in a cab and you're looking out the window, you are not actively using language necessarily to describe the scenery but the moment you want to think about that or communicate that, then you are able to use language. It's as if the experience of seeing the scenery is something different, and you can store it, but only use language when you need to access it. So maybe there's some analogous. So that's just a different hypothesis. There's an analogous thing with dreams and other subconscious.
I, I think there is. Uh, so uh, I but it's still of interest to me. How does it become language? You know, some translation into whatever the subconscious did ends up being language, and I'm not sure I understand that process. But I but so far this seems tenable to me, that for evolutionary reasons, we have a chunk of our brain that processes things. And since it arose long ago, I would doubt that it uses language because it arose in things that don't have language or not much of it. Okay, so that's a part of our brains that evolution has preserved. But as humans, we have a great need, and it's very important for our survival to communicate with others. Yes, we live in societies, and and uh, and so in order to do that, language is the tool of doing that. You have to speak the same language as a person. Okay, and so that's what I think maybe language is about. It's in the service of communication. But the subconscious probably doesn't use language, or not in the way language is intended to be used. Okay, Ryan.
I think there's a little bit more going on here. So you suggested that the subconscious doesn't use language because of like sort of what we evolved from. I also think if it was good or like useful for the subconscious to use language, I think it would. I think it would
Yes.
have evolved to. So I think actually, and this is sort of why, like, as a like an AI practitioner, I think we shouldn't just assume that like language is the best latent representation. I think there's some like lower space that's like actually just more convenient to work with, kind of how like when you're compiling a program or like when you want to write an efficient program, you write it in assembly, you don't write it in like a higher level language, because the higher level language, it's not like as convenient to do things efficiently, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. That
And
makes sense.
also related idea, I think this like the subconscious processing not in language is related to why sometimes we can understand something but have a lot of difficulty like verbalizing that.
Say that last part again.
So sometimes you can understand something intuitively, but you may just have like a lot of difficulty explaining something. I think this idea that like the subconscious is running in like not language terms is sort of related to why you can have intuition for why something is true, or just like intuition for a thing, but then have like trouble explaining it. And sometimes when you're trying to
Oh,
explain something to someone, you kind of just wish like, why do I have to put this into words? Couldn't I just like just vomit the lower level like at you and just have you understand?
yes.
It'd be so much
Yes,
nicer.
because I understand. Okay, by the way, Nathan Johnson and Anthony, carry on. Last two comments. We'll do that and then we'll call it a day. Uh, Ryan, with regard to what you say, um, I suspect that whatever the raw thing that this unconscious part of our brain is doing, um, we don't have a means of directly communicating that to others. We need a new mechanism arose, and that new mechanism used language. I don't know, but I don't think that we we have the ability to communicate those, whatever it is, the something. I don't have an answer. So, but okay. Nathan.
I think Anthony might have been first.
Okay, Anthony.
So I just wanted to add on, I agree that that your subconscious mind doesn't really use languages because like let's say like if someone was deaf and they never heard sound before, then how would they use language or stuff like that to point out stuff, in their subconscious mind? And then also I like to add that like
That's a good point. I'll think about that some more. Yeah, Anthony, go on.
and then I just wanted to say like, but let's just say if someone was like deaf and blind, like how do they have a subconscious mind and like what are they thinking about or how do they imagine things or whatever that might be. I don't know. I just wanted to throw that in as like just a
Yeah,
question, I guess.
that's another good question, right. So I think even if you're deaf and blind and I guess even mute, um, I suspect you're still processing in your subconscious mind, and ultimately it leads to appropriate changes of your behavior as you go forward in life. Yes, but how could language be involved? And it probably isn't. Yeah, those are good points. I like it. Okay, Nathan, did you have more?
Oh,
Yeah.
I wanted to put forward a theory that I am sure is wrong, but hopefully spark some ideas. I was thinking like there's a missing link between subconscious processing and conscious kind of verbalization. I was thinking it's
Hmm.
possible that, your subconscious mind could, create connections between different memes, and then your conscious mind could try to traverse those memes and talk about those connections. And the reason that I brought that up is because of Ryan's kind of thought of like, hey, like we're not able to verbalize it sometimes, and that's because we don't have a learned word for that connection.
Yeah, okay, so right. So yes, sometimes we just have a feeling, I guess was the way you put it, Ryan. And but we can't communicate it. And so is it the case that if we got that feeling a lot and it had a sort of properties of that feeling as opposed to other feelings you might get, and I'm not using feeling to mean emotion. I mean just the way you perceive it. Uh, might you uh, might it be useful to assign a word to it, right? So you could communicate it. Now, one of the things that uh, is important in this, and I like these ideas, is that there's no point in communicating something that other humans don't experience, right? So, you know, let's say you have a messed up neurological system and you get these genuine feelings that nobody else does, right? Then you're not going to be able to communicate it with a word to anybody else because they don't have those feelings. So you assign words to things that are common to whoever is in your society, I think. All right, so look, this was really good. I really liked it, and I learned a lot from it. Let's continue with it later. All right, but for now, see you guys next.